Thank you all for joining us today for Black Sea Balancing Act, Turkey and the Ukraine Crisis. Today's webinar is hosted by the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. My name is Nicholas Danforth. I'm a fellow at ELIAMEP, and I'll be the moderator of today's event. As we all struggle to make sense of the dramatic and disturbing events of the last 2 weeks, I'm pleased to be joined by two very insightful analysts, Evren Balta and Selim Koru. There. Yes, excellent. Glad to have them on the screen. Evren is Professor of International Relations at Ozyegin University and a senior scholar at the Istanbul Policy Center. Selim Koru is an analyst at the Economic Policy and Research Foundation of Turkey, TEPAV, and a Black Sea Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, FPRI. I'll ask both of them to start off by sharing a few thoughts with us, and then we'll have a discussion and hopefully some questions from the audience. At any point during their presentations or the following conversation, feel free to email in your questions, events@eliamep.gr. Again, events, E-V-E-N-T-S, at ELIAMEP, ELIAMEP.gr. Please email us if you have questions. We'll try to get to them in the discussion section. And in the meantime, Evren, if you'd be willing to start us off, give us your thoughts on how Turkey has been responding to the conflict over the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Thanks for having me today. Let me start by saying that the situation is really catastrophic and it's really impossible to guess at this point. But let me start by looking at the ways that Turkey and Russia has been cooperating so far and how that relationship is going to be evolving or changing, or how it is going to be affecting Turkey's position in the Western alliance. So 3 aspects of Turkish-Russian cooperation have been very important in terms of shaping the regional conflicts and shaping Turkish foreign policy, and as I said, Turkey's position in the Western alliance. And the first aspect is the security cooperation between Turkey and Russia that has been going on for the last decade, and that security cooperation was important for Turkey because it enabled Turkey to counterbalance the Western influence, and specifically the American influence in Syria, and again, specifically the collaboration with the Kurds, American collaboration with the Kurds in Syria. And it also enabled Turkey to increase its autonomy, its negotiation power in the region, again, in the Caucasus and in the Middle East. And the collaboration between Russia and Turkey has been flourished in the absence of an order-setting actor in the Middle East again. They needed each other to develop some sort of an order in the last decade and so. But the most important thing here is that their perceptions, their threat perceptions, their alliance structures, everything really they both have their different frames in terms of seeing the conflicts or the main mechanisms or solutions to the conflict. And they kept pursuing their agendas. Their interests were always different. And this was apparent in the Black Sea, the most apparent in the Black Sea and vis-a-vis Ukraine. And this is what I think is very important in terms of setting the trends after what has been happening in the last 2 weeks. Since 2014, Turkey has especially emphasized the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Although Turkey didn't go along with the sanctions policy of the EU. And let me put a parenthesis here. Turkey's sanctions policy has always been alongside the UN-imposed sanctions and never basically participated to the sanctions of the EU or any other actor for that matter. So that's a very general principle of Turkey's sanction policy. At every opportunity when it comes to the Black Sea, at the highest level, Turkey always stated that Turkey is a NATO member. NATO decisions were supported in the Black Sea to balance Russia, basically. And Turkey actively participated in the NATO exercises. And in fact, And you all know that Turkey and Ukraine signed agreements which included defense industry cooperation, military, and which had a military dimension, selling of Turkish drones to Ukraine, which has been really received negatively from the Russian side. Turkey also didn't recognize the results of the parliamentary elections in Crimea, supported organizations of the Crimean Tatars, and these were not taken well by the Russian side. So Turkey took every opportunity to criticize the Russian presence, both in the Black Sea and also in the Crimea. So I can clearly say that when it comes to the Black Sea, Turkey has always been pro-NATO as a result of its balancing act, because it was trying to balance the Americans in the Middle East, and specifically in Syria, as I said, but it was trying also to balance the Russians in the Black Sea. And right now, we see basically the continuation of this rhetoric. For example, when you look at the Turkish policy over Straits in the last 2 weeks, it's not a pro-Russian position. It's also increasing. Turkey has been also increasing its military cooperation and dialogue with Ukraine. Although Turkey has been abstained from removing Russia from the Council of Europe, it voted affirmatively for the resolution of condemning Russia in the UN General Assembly. More importantly, in terms of the Straits regime, Turkey decided to implement that one specific article of the Montreux Convention, which says that the passage of the warring parties, the passage of the ships of the warring parties will not be allowed, and closed the Turkish Straits to the military ships of the warring parties, and warned all the parties, now includes neutral parties too. Turkey will not be allowing passage of any type of warships, not allowing, but will be very much warned all the other parties that this not be tolerated. So this is, as I said, has been going on in terms of NATO. Turkey's position has been alongside the NATO position in the last 2 weeks, but we don't know. Okay, this is the Black Sea, and it has always been in this line, but we don't know what's going to be happening in Syria, what is going to be happening in the Middle East. Right now, it's impossible to see what the consequences of this conflict in Syria and the consequences of this conflict on the Turkish-Russian collaboration. Let me say a couple of words about the economic cooperation of Turkey and Russia, and energy cooperation too, which I think is very important. And as you know, Russia has been the second only after Germany in the list of Turkey's top trading partners. The annual trade of volume is huge. Russia has been the major energy provider of Turkey. There has been a lot of diversification effort in the last 3-4 years in terms of finding alternative energy resources. And dependence on Russian energy imports has decreased tremendously in the last 3-4 years, but still 50%, almost 50% of Turkey's gas exports are coming from Russia. So this is a huge dependence. And also in 2021, Turkey had around $30 billion overseas investment in the construction sector. And you know that Turkey is one of the major developmental paths or model of Turkey is construction sector. And $10 billion was in Russia. So it's also huge. When you look at the tourism sector, and given that Turkey's economy has been in crisis and needs dollar inputs tremendously, specifically because of the coming debt payments in June, I guess, Turkey really needed tourists to come in, and Russia is the top tourist sending destination to Turkey, followed by Germany and then by Ukraine. So it's gonna really affect Turkey's economy in a very negative way. And you can add to that textiles, which Russia and Ukraine is one of the major destination countries for the Turkish textile industry. You can also add the agricultural sector. There is also a dependency on the Russian fertilizers in the agricultural sector, which would create not only in Turkey, but as we see globally, a huge increase in food prices. and you can add many other things. So the economic cooperation between Russia and Turkey has been highly asymmetrical, meaning that the exit costs from this cooperation for Turkey is much higher for Turkey than Russia. And we have experienced this in 2015 crisis, and Turkey economy really got negatively affected with the sanctions of Russia over Turkey. This is going to cost, in terms of economy, this is going to cost Turkey's economy a lot. And sanctions may not work for Turkey specifically because of the gas dependency of Turkey's economy to the Russian sector. But as I said, in principle, Turkey says that I only go along with the UN imposed sanctions and not with the EU imposed sanctions and this and that. In principle, for all the conflicts, for all the sanctions, this may be the policy of Turkey in the upcoming days as well. Finally, let me say a couple of words about the negotiations, whether Turkey could be a mediator, because as you can see, as we all know probably who are following the conflict, the high-level meeting of the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia has happened in the Antalya Forum today. This negotiation attempts didn't go anywhere, but it shows, or it really increased the effort of Turkey to become a mediator in this conflict, having good relations both with Russia and having good relations both with Russia and Ukraine. The problem is that, Turkey may not continue with the mediation efforts, but because of Western perception of Turkey, we can talk about this more in the Q&A. But it seems that currently Turkey has been emerging with all this high-level diplomacy traffic, phone calls, high-level visits to Turkey has been emerging as the top. The possibility of Turkey becoming a negotiator in this conflict is increasing. And this is also related, last word, this is also related to the fact that these two leaders, specifically Putin and Erdogan, has sort of an understanding of each other in the major conflicts of the region in the last decade. They have a similar way of working or a similar way of seeing things and resolving things, a sort of an understanding, as I said, and that might help Turkey's intervention or diplomacy efforts in the situation. So let me stop here, and we'll continue if there are any questions from the audience. Thanks.
All right, thank you. That was a remarkable amount of material. We covered a number of aspects of this, and it's amazing how many aspects we still have left to cover. We will get to many of those in the question and answer, but until then, Selim, give us a sense. I want to recommend an excellent article that you wrote for War on the Rocks at the start of this conflict, based on the assumption, I think at the time, that many of us had, that this was going to, militarily at least in the short term, this was going to go very well for Russia. I'm eager to hear your thoughts about a lot of things, particularly some of the issues you touched on that article, how in the long term, Russia's decision to launch this conflict, and then, depending on how the conflict plays out, the results of it might influence Erdogan's thinking and the thinking of those around him in Ankara.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. In the long term, as you said, there was in the early days of the conflict, of the war, there was this notion that a lot of things might go wrong, and this new world that we're embarking on, right, might be very different from the cozy one we're used to. But at least one thing, at least one silver lining will be that Turkey will once again be a sort of a more bearable NATO ally, that because the thinking goes, and it seemed like this was almost too obvious to state, that just like in the 50s, right, Turkey would feel threatened by the Russian bear up north, and it would hunker down in this very comfortable alliance that it had been neglecting but this conflict would sort of once again give it the idea that it needed its NATO alliance, and I think you could almost sort of feel that people thought, okay, it's going to be a more pro-Western country again. My argument was that there are very good reasons to doubt that in the long run that Turkey would sort of change course, or that it would fundamentally change its behavior, right? That it would depart from the course that it's currently on, which I would argue is preparing it for a post-alliance stance. It's preparing it for a stance in which it can stand on its own in the region, right? And I was thinking of this, and I think it's very useful to think about how the West thought of Russia before all this, and probably still is. And I'd recommend Timothy Snyder's recent, well, it's not very recent, but fairly recent book on the subject, where he's arguing, well, these ideas in Russia of basically proto-fascism, of Russian nationalism, were actually there all along, that the philosophers that Putin was recommending to people around him, and his understanding of history, this was not a secret. But people in the West especially just thought of it as color, that there's these countries around Europe and in the world that have kind of funky ideas about their nations and what the future would look like, and are doing some objectionable things in their countries, but it doesn't really matter because they'll be rational. At the end of the day, they'll respond to sort of rational stimuli. You can have carrots and sticks. You can sort of reason them into integration, right? The market economy, right? Into globalization. You could do that. And with this war, hopefully, people will realize, that these ideas, they actually matter. They actually shape countries' behaviors in ways that have very, very real consequences, right? So this sort of inevitable liberalization isn't inevitable at all. It's anything but, right? And I would very much agree with that, and I encourage people to apply that idea to Turkey. The ideas that the Turkish elite for the past 20 years now have espoused, actually, I would submit, matter, right? And once you take those ideas seriously, there is no NATO convergence. It's absolutely out of the question, I think, over the long term, right? Well, the short term, yes, Turkey is in this alliance that in crises like this, it very much acts as part of the alliance, as difficult a partner as it may be sometimes from a Western perspective, right? But over the long term, I think popular perceptions in Turkey, which are very much conditioned by the government, say otherwise, right? And if you look at Turkey's investments, they say otherwise as well. I was reading, for example, the other day, a Q&A with Hulusi Akar, the Minister of Defense, and he was saying, well, we have problems with the Greeks, but we're managing them and stuff. And his point was, well, Greek armaments are coming in from NATO, but our armaments aren't, right? And this seems to be a thing that's often said, that this is an added strength of Turkey. But if you're an ally in the long term, aren't you supposed to rely on your allies for these very complex weapon systems like fighter jets and air defense, etc.? Right? And if you don't do that, which is now seems to be Turkey's policy. It seems to be the direction that Turkey is headed in. Now, it may be that this wasn't Turkey's choice, right? That the United States really did not sell Turkey the Patriot battery system, or that the United States unfairly kicked Turkey out of the F-35 program. It's really beside the point. What we're talking about is the world as it is, and the world as it is evolving in that direction. So that was my argument. And yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be had whether how this war impacts that future, whether it accelerates our movement towards that future, or whether it sort of pares it back a little bit. But I haven't seen anything that would change the current alignment.
Let me just push you specifically on that, and then I'll have more questions for both of the panelists. It does seem striking. One of the things you mentioned in your article was, irredentism, and how the specter of irredentism, which it seemed to have receded, was suddenly, with Russia's invasion, very much on the forefront of people's minds. One thing that struck me in looking at the response to this is, there were so many aspects of what people in the last 5 years have begun to very optimistically refer to as the liberal international order, that were very ambitious, that were very, idealized, romanticized, the idea of, democracy and capitalism spreading throughout the world and solving everyone's problems. To the extent people really believed in that in the 90s, clearly proved overly optimistic. But it did seem like in the response that we saw from Europe to this invasion, there was a sense that deep down, there was a core belief, a kind of horror at state-on-state irredentist aggression that really, and you all are sitting much closer to Europe than I am. You might have a different read on this, but it seemed like that was something, at the core of what this historical memory, this historical fear of irredentism, that limited Europe's response, that motivated Europe's response and led them in an interesting way to use, not military power in this case, but economic power, use the kind of interdependence of the Russian and European and Western economies in order to try to check Russia's actions. So I'd be curious to hear from both of you. How effective is this likely to be? And if, a question, Selim, that I think a lot of people had for your article, if that proves to be more effective, and again, that's very speculative at this point, will that shape people's thinking at all? So I'll address that to Selim, and then Evren, if you want to join in with thoughts, by all means.
Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, my internet connection sometimes does this.
We're hearing you fine. You look frozen.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so irredentism and liberalism. I think if I'm understanding you correctly, the question sometimes is liberalism bunk, or has it maybe lost its appeal? And what you're saying is perhaps not because of the resistance that we're seeing. Sorry, I think some of what you said got cut off, but
yes, that's the essence of it.
Yeah, one thing that struck me, that I think everybody saw this. There was this video of a guy driving along the road in Ukraine, and then he stops by next to a tank, right? And they sort of banter. He's saying, "Oh, you guys are losing," and he drives off. What struck me there was, in some sense, Putin isn't entirely wrong in the sense that, these people are very compatible, right? They do obviously speak, they do have a language in common, let's say, right? And they do think very easily, right? And I was recently, a few months ago in Ukraine, and I'm not a Russian speaker by any means, but, it did feel, I had that feeling very much. And it seemed to me that what the Ukrainians are fighting for isn't necessarily national distinction, but a shot at being European, and what the Eastern Europeans kind of had. It's not being distinct. It's, having a pension and stable jobs. That's sort of the prosperous future of being a boring country. That's seems to be what they want. And it seems to me that Turkey, for example, right now is becoming a more and more difficult place to live, and all these doctors are leaving Turkey, right? And all these professionals, a lot of people I know included, and people never go to Russia or China or any place else. They go to the liberal West, right? So it's not necessarily that liberalism is bunk or that inevitability, that these things aren't inevitable. Perhaps it's just that along the road there's going to be very large groups of people, tens of millions of bunched together into our countries that simply aren't convinced, right? And what to do about that? And what I would suggest is that ignoring the problem, right, and sort of sweeping it under the carpet and pretending that that isn't going to cause a major problem in the future isn't going to solve things. Like these huge ideas, also present within the United States, are going to matter in a major way, and they can cause these huge rupturous events like wars or civil wars and whatnot.
I can add a couple of
yes, please do.
This. Okay. So one of the things that Selim Koru has said about the people really want to go to West is pretty much there everywhere. And I think it's an important dimension, because when you look at Turkey and how Turkey's political landscape has been evolving in the last decade, maybe more than a decade, you see that politically, in terms of the political identities, anti-Westernism has been on the rise, and Turkey is one of the countries with the highest anti-Americanism. But this question is a political question, right? In terms of alliances, whether Turkey's foreign policy should be autonomous or not. So that's there. It's still there. It's a still important component of Turkey's political identity, and it's going to be shaping the Turkey's presence or alliances in this coming world order, whether we are going to have a new world order. So this is going to be an important component of how Turkey is going to be replacing itself. But as Selim Koru has been saying, in terms of the imaginations or individual aspirations of the people, when you ask them where they do want to live, where their kids should get educated, the aspiration is always the West. And it's about the law and legal systems and stability and this and that. But these are really two different things, and people really differentiate in terms of their individual aspirations and the political aspirations for the country. Call it schizophrenic, yes, it may, but this tension is there. And it doesn't say much about like Turkey's alliance. It doesn't say much about how this situation is currently evolving. And two more things that I want to add to this liberalism debate. The thing that has been going on, this autonomy debate or balancing debate in Turkey, or the ideas of expansionism or being a more autonomous state, is not only about the domestic public opinion or domestic ideas. It has always had an external dimension, and it was always about the Western position in two ways. The first way is the West has tolerated autonomy, right? Indirectly or indirectly. You see that tolerance. Okay, there were sanctions towards Turkey when Turkey bought S-400s, but, well, not really. The sanctions didn't have much effect either on Turkish economy or either Turkish politics. So there you see that tolerance. And in this upcoming world order, if there is any, what is going to be important, whether that tolerance is going to be there or not. So we need to see the Western reaction to the Turkey's demands or autonomy or collaboration to Russia. It's going to matter a lot. Right. And the second thing is that there was a lot of fractions, ruptures within the Western alliance itself, which is sort of the cause of this autonomy, tolerance to the autonomy as well. And you see that even towards Russia, there was a lot of fracture between Germans and France, UK and the US, and how to include Russia in or out, how to see Russia, how to evaluate Russia, gas deals, Nord Stream. You can add a lot of things, but there was a lot of fracture. So when you have a lot of fracture in terms of the foreign policy in an alliance, then actors like Turkey, Russia, can really play into that, right? And get a lot of autonomy out of that. And it also creates, decreases your capacity to sort of enforcing an order where the situation is really chaotic and your allies really needs help, right? So the Western unwillingness to be present in the conflicts, which really mattered for Turkey in Syria, or collaboration with Turkey, is also an important component of this reluctance to work with the allies. So with this conflict evolving, we may see that, we are already seeing that these fractures are closing, right? We see more cohesion in transatlantic alliance. We may see less tolerance to the autonomous actors. We may see less tolerance to the personalization of power, because we now know the consequences of the personalization of power. These things, these external dimensions are going to matter a lot, because these ideas that Turkey has always been there, right? The anti-Americanism has been with us since 1970s. This autonomy of Turkey, foreign policy has been with us since 1923 in different ways, but it has been with us, like it came and go. These ideas should find pathways that really sort of strengthening them, giving them opportunities to realize the aspirations of the political actors. And my own thinking is that political opportunity has always provided by this fracture and the incapacity and the tolerance to the autonomy from the West, specifically in the last decade, whenever it comes to conflict, civil war situation, refugee problems, you see that. And I think I really would like to underline that.
Well, let me follow up and push you on one aspect of this. I think one of the questions that a lot of people have is how specifically this tolerance autonomy debate is going to play out in the economic realm. Mm-hmm. And, from the start of the conflict, one of the things people were saying, two of the things people were saying was that A, it would take an enormous economic toll on Turkey, and that B, as the conflict proceeded, the balancing act that Turkey was attempting between NATO and Russia would get particularly more difficult. And it does seem like the sanctions issue is one of the areas where that's going to play out most dramatically. In part because you've seen the West more unified on sanctions than expected. The question of whether Turkey simply proceeded without participating in EU sanctions, the question of as these took more and more of a toll on Turkey's economy and Russia's economy, Turkey actually looked for opportunities to use this to develop its economic relations with Russia. We heard Erdogan mention that in relation to a call he had with Putin. How would that dynamic shape Turkey's economic situation? And if you had more pressure coming from the West, or if you had more opportunities for Turkey to take advantage of what's going to be a very desperate economic situation in Russia by looking for ways to help Russia maintain some kind of economic lifeline to the outside world beyond EU sanctions. Is that going to result in Turkey facing more of a backlash, more pressure from the United States and Europe? And if so, how does Turkey deal with it?
And the question is to me or?
Is to you.
Okay. I don't know really. I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer because, as I said, the economic relationship between Turkey and Russia is asymmetrical, meaning that the exit costs for Turkey is huge. Right now, it's still huge for Turkey, even worse than the Russia's situation in some ways, right? I mean, the Russian economy is really going bad, but Turkish economy is really going bad as well. So these two countries, in a way, needed each other in terms of their economic relations, and they even sustained this economic relations when they were at the brink of war. Specifically, gas trade, right? If you remember, again, 2015, Turkey, after Turkey downed the Russian jet on the Syrian border, there were sanctions coming from Russia and Turkey, and Russia never imposed sanctions on the gas trade. This is like a vital line for Turkey, and I mean, there's no way that Turkey is going to be joining to the sanctions over Russian gas, and I think that's still a fracture within the EU as well, because countries needing Russian gas is really not supporting sanctions over gas, but countries like US and UK, which are not dependent on Russian gas. Maybe UK is like 5% of gas is coming from Russia, and the US is self-reliant, basically. So it's easier for this country is to go with the sanctions, specifically sanctioning the gas industry. That's a different matter, never going to happen for Turkey. There will be more diversification efforts, a lot more diversification efforts. We may see developments in terms of nuclear power plants, Akkuyu and this and that, because it really requires collaboration, daily collaboration almost, which may be difficult in this upcoming period. So those things may evolve and change. But in terms of tourism, it already stopped. If you look at, for example, I mean, that's because of SWIFT. I mean, Turkey, whether it backs up the sanctions or not, it really doesn't matter when Russia is out of the SWIFT. So Russian tourists don't come to Turkey, and it adversely affects Turkey. And in many cases, in terms of freezing the assets, stopping technological collaboration and this and that, whether or not Turkey is supporting the sanctions system or not, Turkey is in the sanctions system. Many actors globally are in the sanctions systems because they are global sanctions other than gas. And that's not going to happen, as I said, but it's not going to happen for many of the EU countries as well in the last coming years. We may see some sanctions coming from the Russian side. That would be a huge thing. Maybe not now, but maybe next winter or so, if this goes on. That may be a huge thing. But that set aside, one of the things, let me stop here because I really talk too much. Maybe Selim, Koru wanted to add something, but then I can just add a couple of things later on.
Let me pause for a second before that and just say, again, if anyone in the audience has questions, please email us at events@eliamep.gr. Again, EVENTS at ELIAMEP, ELIAMEP.gr, as in GR. Selim, if you have thoughts on this, I'd be eager to hear them. But I also wanted to ask both of you something that I think ties together a lot of threads that we've been talking about, which is specifically how Turkish public opinion has viewed both the conflict in itself and the way Ankara so far has responded to the conflict.
Sure. So very briefly on economics, I think we're in this place where the government realizes, I mean, a little bit like the Russians, that doing the sort of liberal homework of structural reform and moving up the economic chain sort of is very hard work, right? And they're not really equipped to do it. So what they, for example, started, they started this really highly experimental phase in economic policy, I think, where I think this was at the start of the pandemic. I think after the first month or so, when it was declared a pandemic, Erdogan wasn't to be seen for a week or so, which isn't, it doesn't happen very often. And then he came out, did a big meeting, and he said, we're going to be the new China of the European market. This is what we're going to do, right? We're going to compete with the Chinese for the European market. And what they ended up doing was they kept fiscal discipline, very tight fiscal discipline, right? Let the lira tank, basically, right? Which allowed it to makes labor cheaper, makes your exports much more lucrative, right? And the problem was it makes life miserable for everybody in Turkey, right? So after a while, they decided, okay, maybe this is too much. We're going to try something different. So they're going through all these heterodox methods, right? And now I don't know if this is going to last very long. But I mean, the price of energy is rising again, right? And heavy industry, which is what this policy relied on, right? Which is, you do heavy industry. It's very top heavy. Growth policy, right? We do heavy industry and stuff, but it's going to be more expensive again. So I don't know. Who knows? Who knows if they'll sort of try something else next time something shifts. It's a very adaptable and shock absorbent economy. So we'll see. In terms of public opinion, real quick, I think, and this just strengthens, I think, my already held opinions. The overwhelming majority of people in Turkey, I thought that this was somehow NATO luring the Russians into a trap, right? I think we're conditioned, our generation after the 90s, the past 30 years or so, right? We are conditioned to think of Western hegemony, right, as dominating everything. And if there's Western hegemony, then everything more or less is the West's fault. Because it is the hegemon, it's responsible for things happening. And of course, I do agree that NATO expansion in the noughts, I think, was a mistake, and then in the 2010s, and inadvertently caused all this. But the idea seems to be, I see across government channels as well as, opposition channels, primarily TV is what I'm talking about here, a sense that NATO is responsible. The Russians, in government channels, there's a softer view of the Russians sometimes not, but sometimes there is. In opposition channels, the Russians are also kind of villainous. There's an outpouring of sympathy towards the Ukrainians. I think that is across the board for everybody feels that way. And Turkey-Ukraine relations were doing very well anyways. I mean, it's one of the few countries as a Turkish citizen that you can actually travel to with an ID. You don't even need a passport. And the restaurants are cheap. A lot of people have been going. There were lots of flights to Kyiv and Odessa. And, well, I think you can see that in the coverage, that there's an outpouring of great sympathy. But I think nobody's going to be more Western with this.
So, Evren, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the public opinion question as well. I also wanted to ask you about a question we just got from our audience. We obviously talked about the Black Sea. At the outset of this, people are also, not surprisingly, curious about the impact that this will have in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean, where Turkish-Greek tensions have obviously occupied a lot of our attention over the last several years.
Lots of things are going to be changing. They already change, I guess. So in terms of the public opinion, I see a lot of confusion. because, as Selim has been saying, that Turkish public opinion in the last 30 years or so has been conditioned to see the West as the aggressor, and NATO expansionism as the major reason of aggression. But now the TV channels have been dominated by this buildings collapsing, people dying on the streets, and Russia acting very aggressively in Ukraine. So I see a lot of confusion and the fact that NATO maybe not is the only aggressor in the world that I see, like emerging in the classrooms whenever I talk to people, but there is still a lot of confusion, which really brings me to two things. I mean, the Turkish public opinion is generally very sensitive to politics or to the elites, right? Elites have this really power to shape the Turkish public opinion in many issues. You see that in terms of the support to the European Union, support to NATO, relations with Russia, because when you look at, for example, 2015 period, whether Russia is an ally or not, really was like people didn't see Russia as an ally, saw it as an enemy, and then immediately changed in a year. So we see a very fluctuating public opinion, except some matters, anti-Americanism, questions about Aegean could be one of those. I mean, there are some core issues that you don't see sort of fluctuation, but the politics in general shape Turkish public opinion, and that's a trend. I mean, it's so you have that. And the other important thing about the public opinion I was going to say, but I forgot. So if I remember, I'll just mention it. But let me say a couple of words about the Black Sea and East Med question and the Aegean. I think, as we see from this, again, top-level visits from countries like Israel, and Mitsotakis is going to be visiting, I guess, on Monday next week. So there's a lot of dialogue going on. And part of that dialogue is always, of course, about the Russia-Ukraine war, about the conflict itself. But part of the conflict is finding alternative energy resources, making them more viable, increasing cooperation over those alternative resources, and decreasing the conflict so that they become more viable, as I said. And I think this conflict put the East Med on the top of the agenda again. And we'll see more cooperation around East Med and the resolution of conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean. Probably there is going to be, hopefully, there is going to be more push for the resolution of the conflict, for more peaceful means, because energy diversification is the top agenda of both Turkey and Europe right now. If you are dependent on Russian gas, you are dependent. Your industry is dependent. Your houses are dependent. It really matters. And Russia has been using it instrumentally, learned to use it instrumentally in the last 20 years. It's a geopolitical tool that Russia has been using, and it was not going to refrain using natural gas geopolitically. So energy diversification is number one. That's going to push climate-friendly policies, the Green Deal of Europe, and energy diversification through climate-friendly energy means. And also it's going to push alternative energy resources. It may even push Iran nuclear deal, but that is another issue where Russians are taking part as well. But East Med is definitely going to be more on the agenda. And my guess is that we'll see more cooperative dynamics.
Selim, whenever anyone says anything optimistic or talks about a silver lining, I'm always eager to see if you have an alternative viewpoint.
I do agree with Evren Hoca that there's some cause for optimism on the Eastern Med question and things being resolved. but it makes me think of also Nord Stream 2. You know, the Russians had and the Germans had built this big, beautiful pipeline, and now it's canceled because of political issues. Again, I mean, the idea behind that pipeline also, I mean, there's clearly a very economic rationale, right? To bypass all these other pesky European countries and, you know, connect the producer and the consumer, and that's it. Now, but I mean, pipeline diplomacy in general has this liberal idea behind it. The thought that if these countries are economically interdependent, then conflict becomes less likely. They have to deal with each other over time, and more, they'll start resembling each other, right? And the more attractive part is going to, well, the less attractive country is going to look like the more attractive country. This is sort of implicit in the idea. And this was a big thing in the 90s when also, you know, the Americans backed the Baku-Tiflis-Ceyhan pipeline, right? And I suppose sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Nord Stream 2 showed us that maybe it doesn't always work. So yes, I think it's good, especially the Israel visit recently. It looked very good, and there's cause for optimism. What I would urge people is to be more cautious and take ideas seriously, right? And then when a good story comes along, and when there is cause for optimism, such as this, to always consider, well, maybe it's couched into a big thing that's not going where you want it to go. Right? Does that make sense? Hopefully.
The hour has gone by very quickly. Let me ask in closing, Evren, do you have any final thoughts on any of this that you'd like to share with us?
Okay, sorry. Maybe just one thing about the negotiations and Turkey becoming this channel for diplomacy. Yes. This may happen or may not happen. I don't know. We'll wait and see. But this may create, again, room for autonomy for Turkey. If Turkey is going to be really this core or this mediator, right, between Russia and Ukraine, then for many things, to talk to Russians, for sanctions, for other things, Turkey may again carve sort of an autonomy out of that. And would say that this really, I mean, this autonomy will enable Turkey to be in dialogue with Russia, right? I think that's an important line to watch, whether Turkey is becoming the mediator and whether that's strengthening Turkey's autonomous position, and whether that autonomous position is now tolerated because for the very act that Turkey is being the mediator in this conflict. I think that's going to be an important component or an important part to see whether Turkey's alliance patterns will be shifting in the upcoming days, months, years. That's it. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you to both of our guests. This was a fascinating conversation. Let me also extend our particular gratitude to Olena. She's actually based in Kyiv right now. In spite of that, she was eager to try to join our panel. She just wrote to say that she was not able to, but again, our enormous appreciation that in spite of everything going on there, she even considered making time for this. So thank you to her, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined us.